Thanks so much to everyone for joining us. We're just going to give it a couple of minutes while everybody joins the webinar, and then we will get started.
Hello, everyone. 28 people so far are interested in WCAG 2.2.
A creative shout out to the person whose name is See Me Please. I can assure you, you are being seen, and thank you very much for joining us.
Very seen.
If you do need to add the captions in a separate browser, someone from the AI Media team has just put a link to those in the chat.
Lovely to see a few familiar names on the list.
Yeah, I reckon they've got some Perla questions for us.
There's one person who is known for I heckle him and he heckles me at all the events, and so far I haven't seen his names pop up. So right now I'm okay.
Yeah, I think I know exactly who you're talking about.
Yep.
I'm dreading the moment when I see the name pop up on screen. But on that note, it is 3 minutes past the hour, so I might get started. Thank you very much to everyone for joining us for today's webinar. I would like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands that we join this webinar from today and pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging. I would also like to acknowledge any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining the webinar today. Thank you very much to everyone who has joined today's webinar. Today's webinar is an Ask Us Anything related to the newly released Web Content Accessibility Guidelines version 2.2. My name is Chris Pycroft, aka Crispy. It is wonderful to have you here. I am your designated heckler for today's webinar, and basically what that means is that you get to ask all the really difficult questions, and I get to ask it to Sarah and Sam on your behalf. So please don't hold back. I know those two are probably going to hate me for saying that, but we're looking forward to the questions that you have in today's webinar. With that, I should more properly introduce our presenters. We do have Sam Hobson, one of our digital accessibility consultants, university lecturer extraordinaire. I could go on about your many trades and talents, but it's wonderful to have Sam join us for his first ever webinar with us at Intopia. And joining us is not Julie, unless Julie has grown significantly taller and changed hair color. But we do have Sarah Poulos, one of the co-founders and directors of Intopia, who has very kindly agreed to fill in for Julie last minute, who's unfortunately needed to step away due to a personal matter. So thank you very much to both Sam and Sarah for joining us today. Today's webinar is an Ask Us Anything, which means that we're hoping that there will be lots of questions from each and every one of you. So with that, I should probably point out that there is a Q&A feature for you to be able to ask all of your questions. Use it early, use it often. The Q&A feature is there on your screen. Please do submit all of your questions through there if you can, and it will be my job to kind of sort through those, and hopefully we'll be able to get to as many of those questions as we possibly can. I do want to give a little bit of a disclaimer. Obviously, WCAG 2.2 has only been out, I think, less than 2 weeks, I want to say. So please be kind to us with our questions. If you do have those Perla questions and it's something we might need to throw back to our brains trust of digital accessibility consultants, we might take those kinds of questions on notice, and we'll make sure that we put up answers to those questions with the recording that we'll put on our website, hopefully next week after the event. I'd also like to acknowledge that captioning for today's webinar is being provided by AI Media. And that if you do need to leave the webinar early for any reason, we will post a recording of the webinar on our YouTube channel, hopefully next week. So if you subscribe and turn on your notifications, you will get notified when the recording of that is ready. So while people start to put in their questions, I might do a bit of an overview, hopefully. Do this succinctly and shortly, because WCAG is one of those.
Yes. You know I'm going to be a pain. I'm actually going to suggest also to people, Chris has mentioned the Q&A feature, which is a text-based entry. I know that probably some of these questions are going to be quite complex, so we can actually accept questions or comments by audio, and I'm totally making this up and not having run this past Christy before, but I also know that there's probably going to be quite a nuanced questions. So if you would prefer to do them via audio, let us know, and we can actually give you the ability through Zoom. At the moment, you can't go off mute, but we can actually give you that function. And so if your question is a particularly curly one and probably isn't easy to type, do let us know, and we will organise that too.
We might need to figure that one out, I think, as we go, as we might need to. Of course you do. Of course you do. This is not your first webinar, not your first radio, but yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that. Cool. So a summary of WCAG 2.2 while people get their questions in. So with the latest update to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, it was the first, I don't want to say the first biggest update, but it was the biggest update to the guidelines in around 5 to 5.5 years. The previous version of WCAG 2.1 was or did become a recommendation in June 2018, and so nearly 5.5 years later, this is the next version of the guidelines. To summarise, there are and we did also bid fond farewell to one particular success criteria. I think it's the first time the success criteria has actually been removed from the guidelines, but it was done for a good reason, and we'll talk about that in a moment. The 9 new success criteria that have been introduced, there are 2 that are at level A, 4 that have been introduced at level AA, and 3 that have been introduced at level AAA. And shout out to the captioners that are going to need to deal with a bit of technical jargon for this part. So good luck and thank you to you. The new success criteria that have been introduced at level A, we have consistent help and redundant entry. At level AA, we have focus not obscured minimum, dragging movements, target size minimum, and accessible authentication minimum. And for level AAA, we have 3 new success criteria: focus not obscured enhanced, focus appearance, and accessible authentication enhanced. That is a lot of information that's just come at you in about 45 seconds. So if you want to get a bit of a summary, a text summary, I should say, of what the changes are to the guidelines, you can head to the Intopia website, and under the articles section, we do have an article there called WCAG 2.2 is here, and you'll be able to have that in a text format. We also do have it in a visual format, which you'll find under the resources section of our website through the WCAG 2.2 map. And I do need to quickly say thank you to everyone who has given us really positive feedback about the map. I think we've been completely blown away by the response that we've had to the 2.2 map. So thank you to everyone who's liked the map, who's shared the map. It's been great to see all of that kind of feedback. So that in a nutshell was the changes that were introduced to WCAG 2.2. While we wait for the questions to come through from the audience, I do have a couple for you, Sarah and Sam. I'm going to start by asking you both, what is the best thing, do you think, that's been included to WCAG 2.2 that was really kind of needed that wasn't necessarily there before?
I can go first if you like, and hopefully I'm not stealing yours, Sarah. But probably it's dragging movements for me. I think that plugs a really necessary gap that we saw over time when we were trying to apply something like success criteria 2.5.1 pointer gestures to things to which that didn't fit. And I'm going to be slightly cheeky and say another one. I also think target size minimum is a big one for me. I get asked a lot about that by designers, and previously there was only target size stipulations at the AAA level, and that tended to discourage people from picking up something WCAG recommended relative to target sizes. Sarah.
Probably the most complex success criteria is still my favorite, which is the accessible authentication ones. I think given the focus on security, validly so, more and more, we're having different ways that we need to authenticate. And I think being able to do that in a more accessible way is very important. I won't say that I'm not disappointed about some of the things that made it into as what I call the WCAG loopholes in accessible authentication, which may come up later on. But yeah, for me, that's I think just a critical one because of its relation to security.
Perfect. And I think when I was talking with Sam just before we started, I think I gave pretty much the exact same answer for the exact same reason. So just in case you needed another thing why you and I think alike, Sarah, there's just another one to add to the list. Next question that I have for you focuses on, I guess, the removal of the success criteria 4.1.1 parsing. As kind of mentioned in the intro, it is the first time that a success criteria has been moved, or should I say, marked as obsolete and removed, I think is the exact wording that's put with it. Spoiler alert for devs, this doesn't give an excuse for bad code, just saying. Yeah, Sarah or Sam, I'm just wondering if you can take maybe 30 seconds or so just to explain kind of why it is that that particular success criteria has been removed.
I can probably jump in. So under WCAG 2.2, 4.1.1 parsing has been removed. The requirements around 2.0 and 2.1 are slightly different in that because of kind of backwards compatibility, it's not quite removed, but it basically passes as long as you're using HTML or XML from memory. This particular requirement was removed because back in the day, basically, web browsers were and assistive technologies were a lot less forgiving of, let's call it badly formed code. However, as things have improved, any remaining issues that failed parsing actually were shown to fail other success criteria. And so as a result, anything that was kind of left didn't impact accessibility and a person's experience anymore. And so it was deemed that we could actually remove this particular criteria.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Sarah. The last question which I've got for you, and then I'm going to throw it over to the Q&A because we're getting a lot of questions already, which is fantastic. So brace yourself for impact, you two. But the question that I have for you, Sarah, is one that I want to ask because this has come up particularly within the accessibility community quite a few times over the past couple of weeks, particularly within spaces where accessibility champions are dealing with accessibility. Funnily enough, accessibility champions dealing with accessibility, who would have thought? But the question is, I guess it's more of a scenario-based question. So the scenario is that we've got an accessibility practitioner or an accessibility lead who is working within an individual organization, and they've finally had buy-off to implement accessibility across their organization and recognize that the standard that they want to meet most likely is WCAG 2.1 level AA. So they've started work to implement that benchmark or standard across their organization, and now they have the instance where WCAG 2.2 is now here. So I'm just kind of curious to hear from you, Sarah. What is the advice, or what would you recommend for those kind of champions, leads that are trying to implement accessibility within their organization and are now going, oh no, I'm now potentially not implementing the latest version? Like, what do you think they should do?
So there's a few things that you can do. First of all, I would actually, not necessarily to do with champions, just organizations more generally, is that look at implementing 2.2 for any new features. So whether that's in 3 months, 6 months, put a date, put a line in the sand and say anything new from here should actually meet the new WCAG 2.2 requirements. And then put together a plan for any existing content. So how can you go about it, updating existing content so that it does meet 2.2? And that might be a prioritized plan where you perhaps prioritize pages or functions that people are using quite regularly. So that's more a sort of pragmatic what an organization can do. From a champion's perspective, I would look at some of these criteria and go, what are the easy ones to implement? Some of them actually, if you've got a design system, are probably something that you can include or address within the design system. Things like target size, which to be honest, I'm going to hope people are more at that 44 by 44 pixel end anyway. So hopefully that might be a nice one that you can say, actually, we've already met this. Other easy ones, I think, are consistent help and redundant entry. If you're probably doing good UX practice, you're probably ticking those off anyways. So there might be actually some you can already go, hey, look, we're already doing this, and then move on to those ones that are a little bit harder, of which my favorite criteria of accessible auth is probably going to be the hardest one and the one that's going to take the longest to implement, because it does touch so many roles and functions.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that, Sarah. And that actually is a really good segue into our first question that we have from the audience, that they did actually have a question related to accessible authentication. The question is, the guidelines mention that users shouldn't be required to remember passwords. Does that mean website login portals shouldn't use passwords at all?
I can take that one if you want, and Sarah, jump in whenever you like. I think the focus here is on remembering. So the success criteria talks about mechanisms to support users in providing passwords, and that looks at things like allowing password inputs to be used by password managers, so that a password manager can be selected to pre-fill that password. And two, that a user can optionally or additionally paste a password into that field. So it is not talking about not having passwords, it's talking about providing mechanisms that allow the input of passwords that don't require users to remember them.
Perfect. Thanks for that, Sam. Really appreciate it. Next question is related to focus not obscured. Does this mean that the focus indicator needs to be visible at all times?
Yeah,
Sam,
I can take. Yeah,
right.
sure. It's a really good question, this one. So that there's kind of two different levels. There's the AA and AAA level here. I think it's important to read that the success criteria concerns itself with the components visibility, which is slightly more than the focus indicators visibility. So it's at the AA level, it looks that the component isn't entirely obscured, which would then also make sure that the focus indicator isn't entirely obscured. And then at the AAA level, you want no obscuring at all. So there cannot be any obscuring. But I think the important thing to remember is that if you have a visible focus indicator that is just below like a sticky element, but you can't see the component, even though the focus indicator is present, this technically doesn't pass. So ideally, you would want enough of the component to be able to understand the component to be visible. But AA says that the whole thing doesn't have to be entirely visible, just not entirely obscured.
Perfect. Thanks so much for that, Sam. And just to call out for people, if you do want to ask any questions, please do submit them through the Q&A feature. We are getting lots of them, but hopefully we should be able to get through all of them over the next 40 minutes, keeping fingers crossed. Next question is a bit more of a general question that asks, how and where do I test websites to ensure that they meet WCAG 2.2, as where I work, their website is no longer accessible and I was unable to flag it. So I'm interested to see if there's a feature where I can run it and get a report to send to my marketing team about the changes to WCAG. I'm going to throw this one over to Sarah.
I can probably start with this, which is, as I scan down the list of success criteria, there's actually probably not a lot that's going to be able to be tested via an automated testing tool. Perhaps target size, and even then I think that's sometimes going to be tricky because of some of the kind of requirements under target size. So I actually think that a lot of the new success criteria are going to require manual testing, which we know that, well, depending on who you talk to about, you know, what you can test using automated tools or not, it's anywhere between 30 and 50%, depending on who you talk to, and I won't go down that rabbit hole. But yeah, I actually think that most of it's going to require manual testing.
Anything to add on that one, Sam?
No, I was going to say the same thing. I think one of the ways that we've phrased it previously is that they're much more design-related success criteria this time than there are things concerned with technical aspects of accessibility or code-related. So yeah, I definitely echo what Sarah said.
Yeah, perfect. And the next question, which we've got, you've actually kind of half answered this one already, Sarah, but in particular the second part might be a good one to ask. So it was a two-part question being, are there automated testing tools that can help evaluate any particular new 2.2 guidelines? And when it comes to manual testing, what are the low-hanging fruit and what are the challenging new 2.2 criteria?
So yeah, on the automated testing front, I think we probably covered that one in that they're quite manual testing things. In terms of low-hanging fruit, probably consistent help is something that many people are meeting already, and that otherwise a kind of quick check can have a look at that. So looking at the success criteria and noting what it details as the kind of help which it believes should be consistent. So human contact details, human contact mechanism, self-help option, or a fully automated contact mechanism, and then making sure that that's in the same location across a set of web pages, basically. So that's something that is something that you could do in a really short amount of time, I guess. Redundant entry might be another one, perhaps less low-hanging, but if you have a form process that spans across multiple pages, check to see if people's information is being asked for multiple times in a way that they can't copy previously entered information from the same page or select it again. So if you have an e-commerce website, for example, where you're asking for billing address and postal address, do you have a checkbox which allows someone to pre-fill one of those with the other? Or are those information on the same page such that you can copy information between them? The other ones are probably a little bit more complex. Things like accessible authentication require a kind of real unpacking of the options that you offer when people do authenticate on your website. Focus being obscured, maybe that's one that you could think about perhaps being implicated by things like sticky headers and footers that you have on your website, or other sticky calls to action. Yeah, that's probably a lot of answers. Sarah, did you have anything to add? Or
No, I think that covers it.
Perfect. Moving on to the next question, and I think this one's a really important one. This has just come through from Josh. And Josh asks, do any of the changes affect previous audit results or their severity?
I think the short answer is no. So when we get a new version of WCAG, it is an extension to WCAG. So I'll come back to parsing in a sec, but essentially it does not change any of the existing criteria. It just adds new criteria, in which case we've got those new 9 criteria. Now, as I said, this time the only exception is parsing. So if you have run an audit before and you've been pinged on parsing, if, as I said, you're using HTML or XML, then actually that is an automatic parse. So if you did have any issues pop up that were just failing parsing, as I mentioned, there are going to be some issues that will still fail, but they should have also been failed, or they should also fail against other criteria. So if you've got anyone that are just parsing, have not been tagged with another success criteria, assuming your auditor knew what they were looking for, then that's the only real difference to any previous audit results. Of course, anything new would include the WCAG 2.2 criteria. Also, no change to their severity either.
I think another thing to just reiterate from what Sarah was saying is that if you meet 2.1, you still meet 2.1, you're still meeting a standard. The addition of an update to a standard doesn't invalidate previous conforming websites to those previous standards, So yeah, it's not about thinking you have to start all over again. It's about acknowledging what's new and, by what time you would like to meet that new standard.
And with that, we've just got one question, which is kind of related, and you've kind of answered this already, but I'm going to ask the question anyway. And it says, there's a question that's come from James that says, won't removing success criteria 4.1.1 parsing in WCAG 2.2 create a major discrepancy with prior versions of WCAG 2? This could result in a lot of largely unnecessary difficulties for adopting WCAG 2.2 and raises complicated questions for people still on WCAG 2.0 or WCAG 2.1.
Yeah, maybe we can take this one together. Major discrepancy. I mean, the previous documents have been updated with a statement that is kind of in concert with what we're at with WCAG 2.2. I think so. As Sarah was just saying, you can reread those previous versions with a new or refreshed understanding of what parsing is interested in. And I think at the heart of the change to 4.1.1 is to remember that the things that sometimes we had previously reported, we being an industry, didn't have a negative impact on assistive technologies, on people with disabilities, and that to report them was to perhaps create work that could have been better directed elsewhere, work or time that could have better been directed elsewhere. So while parsing found code that wasn't up to spec, browsers did all the work to ameliorate that, and the impact of things that purely failed parsing, as a community, we've moved on and realized just isn't there anymore. With the development of HTML5, we're not in a place where that's a problem. And so it should come as a relief to many who felt like they were quite hamstringed by parsing, is the way that I see it. And I completely understand the frustration with the shift away from parsing. I felt it too when it first came out, because I liked to say to people, your code should be better. And I realized that I had to separate that from the actual impact that it was having on end users, and that being my main concern. Sarah, did you have anything else to add?
No, that's a perfect response. And I think your feeling of, I want this criteria in because it means that we've got something, developers need to do better in their coding, was actually, I think, a sentiment that a lot of people felt particularly when it was first floated, that 4.1.1 parsing would be should be made obsolete. And yeah, I had that same conversation with people to say, we shouldn't be using the standard to drive better coding practice. We need to find a better way, because as Sam mentioned, there were things that we were having to fail where we, hand on heart, could say, yeah, really unlikely, or we know categorically this is not going to impact a person's experience. And that's hard when we're getting people to adopt accessibility, when you have to say things like that. People just go, well, why are you telling me to do it? Well, the standard tells me to do it, So I actually do think it's a move in the right direction.
Yeah. I'm just going to quickly ask a follow-up question also from James, where James asks that many organizations have resources that are used with different versions of WCAG 2.2, things like training courses and templates and test tools and things like that. Plus the W3C themselves obviously have a lot of resources that a lot of people use. With parsing being removed, kind of what happens with all of those resources now that you've got effectively a success criteria that's being removed? Do you remove parsing entirely from resources? What do you do about things like WCAG 2.0 and 2.1? Do you leave it into previous versions? Do you insist on readers or users selecting a version so that you can switch things? Do you provide an explanatory text? What are some of the things that you think that you could do if you're working with different versions of WCAG?
So I think if you are working with different versions of WCAG and you want to be very specific and clear, and I say this because sometimes documents that support WCAG, we tend to try to take a little bit more of a friendly approach to some of the advice that we give, because WCAG is quite nuanced, but it also has a lot of what I call those little loopholes. The if this, if that, if something else, and a lot of those times those scenarios don't come up very often. So when we are providing some of that sort of resource, how to, what have you, that sometimes we try and really focus on what do you need to do to both provide the best experience and also to meet the criteria. And sometimes that's actually a lot simpler than the criteria itself. But if you're needing to specifically instruct people, I would say you do need to specifically call out that if it's 2.0 or 2.1, then if you're using HTML or XML, then basically you're done, you just pass it. And then obviously for 2.2, you don't need to worry about it at all. So I would just be quite specific about that. If you know within your organization that you are generally using HTML and XML and you are meeting 2.0 or 2.1, maybe you can just say that's a given and perhaps just provide that advice.
Perfect. Thanks so much for that. Just to give a bit of a call out just for attendees, we've probably got about 20 minutes or so left for questions, and we do have quite a few questions sitting in our Q&A. So if there's anything that you really kind of want to ask Sarah or Sam, probably now's the time to get your questions in through the Q&A feature, just so that we can make sure that we answer them today. Next question is for both of you, and I'm going to throw this one over to you first, Sam. This is more just a general query. Is there anything that you would have liked to have been a part of WCAG 2.2 that's not in there?
That's a great question. I think I'm going to answer quite nebulously. I think it would have been nice if there was some kind of reflection in like pointer gestures of when dragging movements is implicated, but like a bit of a closer connection between those two in the realization that dragging movements is kind of needed in response to pointer gestures. But I think larger than that for me, it's probably focus appearance being at a AAA. So it's not that that information isn't in there, but it's so dense and complicated, and maybe that is received as prescriptive that it has to sit at that AAA level. I wish we'd had a bit more clarity at the AA level, I think, of what focus appearance is trying to do. Just because there's a lot of really useful information in there about, size of focus style, for example, that I think the AA level would have benefited from. That's me.
Yeah, I think building off that, and ironically, I know, Sam, you said you actually, one of your favorite criteria is target size minimum. I'll be honest, that's one of my least favorite criteria, because we know that Google and Apple for so many years have been recommending the 44 by 44 pixels. Actually, it's 44 or 48, depending on whether you're talking Google or Apple. The fact that target size minimum is so, in my opinion, watered down, I think is actually a real shame that we've got a sort of 24 by 24 pixel requirement as the minimum, and some extras in there on top of that. And to be honest, I was really quite disappointed that that got in. I'll be honest, I think it's a harder conversation to have with people. I would be more comfortable almost having the conversation about the target size AAA requirement with organizations, improving that and using that sort of, yes, and it's in line with Google and it's in line with what Apple recommends or that kind of thing, as opposed to now I've got this criteria that, and unfortunately, some organizations still go for that, what is the minimum I need to do? And that minimum, I think now is quite small. So I'm a bit disappointed with that. I'm a little bit disappointed. There's a few, I understand why it's happened, but there's a few loopholes, or what I call loopholes, in accessible authentication in particular. And that's in particular the one-time password being sent to your phone. So according to this criteria, if it's sent to your phone and you need to enter it in your desktop, as long as you have a way to send that code from your mobile phone to your desktop, and then you can copy it into the input field that's going to accept the one-time password, that actually passes. Now, I can understand why, and there is actually a line in understanding that calls this out and says, this is not WCAG's responsibility to gauge how easy or difficult it is to do something like that. But again, I kind of feel like, you know, hopefully organisations are not just seeing WCAG as their minimum, they're actually looking at what is a good accessible experience. And a good accessible experience is not, I get my code on my phone, I have to work out how to actually send it across to my desktop, and then I can use some of these other features or functions that gets around it being a transcription. So that's probably, they're my two biggest bugbears with WCAG 2.2.
Thanks for that, both of you. I'm going to keep rolling on because the questions are still coming through thick and fast. So thank you very much to everyone for submitting them. I know you've answered this question already in chat, Sarah, but I'm just going to ask it to you now. Any hot tips if or when 2.2 will be legally enforced as the minimum for Australian governments and agencies?
Yeah, so as I said, I can say with confidence to watch this space for work happening that will apply to all Australian organisations. I'm not sure that I can say much more yet. I hope in the next month or so you will be hearing more formal information around this.
Definitely stay tuned, and if there may or may not be any announcements, stay tuned to the Intopia website, because I'm sure we'll have some information on it when it happens. Next question is from James. Have the level AAA contrast criteria been shifted to level AA as a huge issue for people with contrast sensitivity?
I'm going to guess this probably is actually around that focus appearance AAA, which actually Sam called out before as one of the, you know, sort of bit of disappointments of WCAG 2.2. For quite a while there, I think focus appearance was sitting at AA, and then it got pushed to AAA. It did get simplified, which was nice, because its first few descriptions were even more complex than it is at the moment. And so, yeah, I'm guessing that's probably what this question is in relation to. And Sam, because you already mentioned kind of being a bit disappointed about this, did you want to add to your sort of thoughts on, you know, how this impacts people every day?
Yeah, I think in the lead up to 2.2, we spent quite a bit of time interested in this coming at a AA level, and we started telling people about ways in which they could, you know, really test and make sure that their focus indicators were doing the best job they could. And I think we can still do that with AAA, but as always, it's harder to compel people who have a AA focus to AAA things. And I think it's something that if you can get past its density, it's really worthwhile taking a look at. And like Sarah said, they have made a lot of great simplifications. So there are some really good rules in there, or guidelines for focus appearance, that they're kind of quite nice and simple. So it's saying that when you have a focus indicator, when it's visible, that it's at least as large as a 2-pixel perimeter around it, and that it has a contrast ratio of 3:1 with the pixels that were there before it in the unfocused state. So if you just think about it like that, I think it's a great goal to aim for, ignoring the fact that it's AAA if you're only aiming for AA.
And I think James just called that out, of government agencies tending to commit to AA. And to be honest, most organisations, government or otherwise, they do tend to focus on up to AA. Having said that, I will say that I've seen a shift. I mean, it is a slow shift in organisations realising that there is much more to accessibility than WCAG, and so, you know, we do this sort of day in, day out of talking to organisations and trying to increase what I call their accessibility maturity, which is moving them beyond that AA conformance to what is just a good experience. And that does often cross over into that AAA area. I think the focus appearance one too, I mentioned design systems very early in this session. And I think this is where focus appearance is one of those ones that if you do have a design system or global experience language, you should actually only have to do this once with your components. So it's not a hard one to implement and maintain if you actually do build it in. So that would be another argument I would make is obviously providing a better experience for people with contrast sensitivities and others, but also that let's actually build it in and, you know, do it once and get it right.
Awesome, thank you for that. We've got a couple of very, I guess, more general questions that aren't specific to 2.2, but really useful questions to ask. The first one is, does a website need to meet every single criteria of a conformance level AA, for example, to be considered compliant, or a percentage of the criteria?
So short answer is, if you want to be fully compliant with, say, WCAG 2.1 AA, you do need to meet every single success criteria. Essentially, there's some requirements that you need to meet it. You need to also sort of processes need to meet it. So full pages, complete processes within your website or your digital product need to meet it. So there's a few actually additional requirements on top of that for you to say that your website needs to be conformant. In reality, most websites are not fully conformant. That is just the reality of things. And when we work with organizations, you know, what we tend to do when we give them an audit is actually look at helping them prioritize those issues. So what is going to affect your users most? You know, there's going to be some of those critical showstopper issues, which we absolutely want to get off, you know, to remove for people. There's going to be some issues that are repeated. So in things like in navigation elements and that, you'd want to focus on those ones. So, you know, there's definitely ways to increase your accessibility in a practical and pragmatic way that has the greatest impact.
Great, thanks for that. Next question, which we've got, which is also a more general question, is how often should a website be tested to ensure it remains compliant with WCAG 2.2 level AA, and does it need to be tested against all the criteria on a regular basis?
Yeah, I can take that one. So I think it's about kind of thinking about integrating accessibility into the process of releasing content onto a website is one of the mechanisms that speaks to this. So acknowledging the WCAG success criteria and what implications they have for all kind of new components, content and elements you release to your website as part of the process of releasing that content, which means writing it, building it, designing it. And then the function of an audit is to kind of give a large sense, a kind of big snapshot at a point in time of a website. So audits are generally something which happen after large pieces of work, or, you know, at a certain interval, as opposed to something that happens more sporadically. So it's kind of like at a process ends, it's to be considerate of the success criteria. And then it's like, with what cadence do we want to be doing audits such that we can ensure that all of those processes are working to produce something that is meeting the conformance level we're aiming for.
I can say that we work with a number of organizations where they, and it's not to say you have to have someone like us do the audit, but they do come to us as a third party to do an audit as an independent review. Generally, they come yearly. So they will do yearly reviews and full audits of their product to see how things are going. But I think those, you know, in addition to what Sam said, you know, even doing some spot checks throughout the year can surface if, for instance, suddenly maybe things have fallen off a bit and they're not doing so well. Doing some sort of spot checks through the year as well can actually help, you know, let you know if, yeah, things aren't going quite as well as you think.
Perfect, thanks for that. Next question we've got, I'm going to take this one because this is one that I can answer. It's Darren asking, can we expect an update on the Utopia accessibility not checklist anytime soon? The answer is yes. We are currently working on that at the moment. We are hoping to have that live on our website in the coming weeks. We'll post on social media when it's ready, but yes. An update to the not checklist is in the works. Thanks, Darren.
Crispy is being polite. I was going to say I'm the bottleneck on that actually to review and push live, and I can say that.
Yeah, so, I can't say that because she's my boss. So yeah. Awesome. Next question we've got.
Hi, Darren, who I have known for 20 odd years.
Next question we've got, can you please provide a quick overview of the target size success criteria?
This is my favorite criteria. I can I can do that if you like. So target size at the AA level looks to ensure that your targets, so the thing that is interactive, is at least 24 by 24 pixels. So we're thinking about like buttons and like icon links and things like that. And then if that absolutely cannot be met, then the spacing between the center of that element and the next interactive element must be at least 24 by 24 pixels. There are some other exceptions, I think. So if the same thing that this interactive element is doing is available on the same page, then it passes as well. So if the same function is available through a different mechanism, if the target is like a link inside a sentence, that's considered constrained by the line height, and so not needing to meet target size minimum. And otherwise, if it's something provided by the user agent and is not provided by the person who's made the website, that's target size. And I too wish it was bigger, but I'm glad something's there.
Awesome, thanks for that, Sam. Next question we've got is from Kai, who asks, are there any tips on anything specific we should add to testing personas to stress the new guidelines?
That is a good question.
Could some of the user stories that you've been developing for the at a glance videos be of some assistance here, perhaps, Sarah?
Yeah, they probably could. And I think WCAG also has those little statements in the understanding, which I think are quite useful as well to probably look at and see about integrating them into any of your personas or the like. I think for accessible auth particularly, having a look at personas and maybe teasing out some of, although accessible auth has got a lot of, between the transcription and the remembering and that kind of thing, but I actually think there's, a lot of richness in that you, and also we know that cognitive tends to be something that's overlooked by people. A lot of the sensory disabilities are ones that are more focused on. So I actually think enhancing your personas with some of those elements to support sort of accessible auth is probably, and consistent help, redundant entry, they all kind of touch within that cognitive space. If you've got any existing personas that are kind of keyboard related or someone with mobility or dexterity challenges, I think that would kind of be able to be weaved into things like dragging movement, which, that sort of relates to that dexterity and kind of thing. Target size, same thing. And focus not obscured, which tends to be, more keyboard related. So not necessarily to do with a pointer user, so mouse or touch, but a keyboard user. So there are a few things I can think of. Obviously, focus appearance, definitely some of the vision related requirements.
Perfect, thank you. Moving on to the next question. How would you attempt to maintain visual consistency with focus appearance for elements where focus can be styled and elements where focus is determined by the user agent? Sam, I'm going to throw that one over to you.
Sure. I mean, if you're in a spot where there's focus or something that you are unable to style, but it does have a focus style, I think that's probably more important than consistency. that it's okay to lose consistency so long as focus is visible across all elements. And then otherwise, it would just be about ensuring that the type of focus style perhaps is emulated. So outlines being often the user agent defaults. Outlines are the best way to kind of meet the concerns of focus appearance as well. So sticking with outlines and things like that. But I think, yeah, I think the existence of a visible focus indicator is probably the most important thing.
Just remembering, I think a conversation you and Julie might have had, which I'm not really, the double focus ring. And does that sort of help with that consistency and it being used on different background colors?
As in providing a colored first focus outline and then a second one on top?
Yeah, sort of a light color, dark color for different, yes.
Yeah, and I think
scenarios.
I think this is the approach that some browsers are taking now as well, right? How they cope with focusing on different backgrounds. So yes, I think that can help. Absolutely. You could also use an outline offset as a way to ensure knowing the kind of background on which you're going to be focused. But yeah, a double focus ring, absolutely. There's some more technical detail that perhaps we can share about that after this. But yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. Next question we've got is from James. Have many previous level AAA success criteria been prioritized to level AA?
I'm not sure if this is in relation. Obviously, there's been no changes to the 2.0 or 2.1 criteria. I don't think from memory, as we've watched 2.2 evolve, that there's been any AAAs that were pulled into AA that I can remember. It more went the other way from memory. I don't know, Sam, if you remember any.
Yeah, I'm fairly certain that's
not
right.
off the top of my head.
Yeah. Usually, unfortunately, I think what we find is that as WCAG goes through its process, and there is a process that they go through for this. Sometimes we did see ones disappear that were just too hard, and I think sometimes they're more likely to go up level because there is reasons why things are classified at different levels. And I think sometimes, yeah, once you get into the criteria and all the things they approve, because basically as you go through that process of the standard, it's kind of, they gather feedback, then they need to provide examples of, implementations that meet it. You must be able to get a pass-fail outcome, which I think is actually why, unfortunately, and this probably actually segues into Scott's question that's coming up, is why unfortunately we see there's not very many new success criteria that cover cognitive, that the sort of cognitive and neurodiverse space. I think a lot of that is because, yeah, the criteria do need to be prescriptive enough that you can get a specific pass-fail, and I think that's where the nuance of some of the things that we do recommend and require for cognitive, it's very hard to get that pass-fail. And so I remember in 2.1 and 2.2 that there have been criteria that were in the early days part of the process that then kind of basically disappeared, and I think it's usually for those reasons. And I think my understanding is so Scott's question is, was there things that the community was hoping would be in 2.2 that weren't quite ready to include in this release? Not sure about ready, but I do believe that there was some objections from the community representing people with cognitive disabilities, because once again, I don't think that they felt that there was enough representation in the new criteria that covered that.
Perfect. Sam, do you have anything just to add on to that question about whether there was anything that was looking to be included in 2.2? No?
Nothing further from me. Thanks.
Yeah, perfect. Our very last question that we've got, and dare I say, we're still getting our heads around WCAG 2.2, but apparently Scott is a bit of a future thinker and asks, will WCAG 3 be the next increment of WCAG? What are the next areas of focus that WCAG 3 will be hoping to solve?
So I can answer the first part of the question fairly easily. Well, easily in that I think this is the last I read, because sometimes these things change daily. But at this stage, I haven't heard that they're going to work on any more WCAG 2 updates. So I think 2.2 is pretty much it. So we are going to be looking at WCAG 3, I think, as the next function. And I know Andrew's on the line, who is all things W3C. So Andrew, if you know anything that I haven't just said, do feel free to shout out. I know you've been entering things into chat anyway. So yeah, I think at this stage we're probably looking at 3. And I think that's also probably partially because there's a lot of effort that goes into this, and they're probably getting to that point where they're like, look, we either continue splitting our effort between WCAG 2 updates versus just focusing on WCAG 3. Having said that, WCAG 3, it's not going to be tomorrow.
No, it won't happen overnight, but it will happen, I believe, as it's commonly used in commercials. But on that, I think we are going to bring today's webinar to a close. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming along. There will be a recording of the webinar that will be made available through our YouTube channel over the next couple of weeks. So please do subscribe and turn your notifications on. If you are interested in more WCAG 2.2 content, please do check out our YouTube channel, because we do have our WCAG at a glance videos that are giving quick 2 to 3 minute snapshots of each of the new success criteria. We're releasing a couple of those every week at the moment. I think we've got all of the level A's up, and we're in the process of publishing the level AA videos. They're all on our YouTube channel. Plus, there are also some past webinars related to WCAG 2.2 also on our channel. But just to, I guess, kind of disclose with those were recorded before WCAG 2.2 were finalized. So there might be a couple of things in there that might not have made the final version of WCAG that'll be in there. If you have any more questions at any point related to WCAG 2.2, we do have a discussion board that is available on our Intopia Learn website, where we're also going to put all of our WCAG at a glance videos. So if you go to learn.intopia.digital, which is the website for our online learning platform, so you can check out all of our videos on WCAG 2.2, or if you want to learn things in general about accessibility and how to apply them to your day-to-day work, all of those videos are there, so that you can check them out, as well as those courses. A big thank you to Sam, and particularly to Sarah, who jumped in last minute today. It was greatly appreciated. Thank you so much for all of your insights and wisdom and sharing all of the knowledge on WCAG 2.2. It is really, really appreciated. Thank you to everyone for coming along. Thank you to AI Media for providing live captioning, and we will have more details on our next webinar shortly that will be posted on our social media. So give us a follow on LinkedIn, Mastodon, X, formerly Twitter. We are all over the place. So please do follow us on social media. Thank you so much for your time today, and enjoy the rest of your day.